I want to start today with something ordinary. You filled up your gas tank this week. Maybe you noticed the number was higher than last week. Maybe you did not think much about it. Prices go up, prices go down. But if you filled up a week ago and you filled up today, the difference is not small. The national average jumped 43 cents in a single week, the largest 1 week increase since Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022. If you have been trying to buy a house or refinance one, mortgage rates just went back above 6%. They had finally fallen below 6% for the first time since 2022. That window lasted less than 2 weeks. If you buy groceries, and everyone does, the diesel prices that drives every truck that delivers every product to every store is up 75 cents a gallon from last week. That increase does not stay at the truck. It moves through the supply chain and eventually it arrives at the shelf. These are not abstractions. These are things happening in your life right now. And I want to explain exactly where they came from because the explanation is not complicated. It is just not being stated plainly. My name is Mucho Balinda. I have spent 15 years as a court interpreter. I read record for a living. And the record on this one is very clear. Everything I just described traces back to one decision made by one person on February 28, 2026, without asking Congress, without asking you. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched a massive coordinated assault on Iran, codenamed Operation Epic Fury. Supreme Leader Khamenei was assassinated in opening strikes. Multiple Iranian military commanders and officials were killed. The stated objective? Regime change. No congressional vote was held before the operation began. No declaration of war was sought. On March 2nd, 2 days after the bombs fell, Trump submitted a War Powers Resolution notification to Congress, not a request for authorization. A notification. There is a difference. A request says, I need your permission. A notification says, I've already acted. I am telling you now. The constitutional framework, what the founders actually designed, Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, is unambiguous. The power to declare war belongs to Congress, not the president. Congress. The founders designed it this way deliberately because they understood from history that concentrated power kills. That when one person can make war unilaterally, the people who die are never the decision makers. They are always someone else's children. The War Powers Resolution of 1973 was passed specifically to enforce this principle after Vietnam. It requires the president to notify Congress within 48 hours of deploying forces into hostilities, and then gives Congress 60 days to either authorize the war or force withdrawal. That sounds like a meaningful constraint, but here's what the records show. And this is the part I want you to understand clearly because it explains everything that happened in Congress last week. The trap built into the system. The 60-day clock is not really a constraint. It is a window. And the window is designed, whether intentionally or not, to be politically impossible to use. Here's the sequence. Strike first, notify Congress after. By the time Congress votes, American service members are in active combat. American embassies are under attack. Iran is firing missiles across the Gulf. 6 Americans are already dead in Kuwait. The Strait of Hormuz is closed. Oil is above $100 a barrel. Now Congress faces a choice. Vote to pull American troops out of an active war or vote to continue. And at that moment, the political cost of withdrawal becomes enormous. It looks like abandoning the troops in the field. It looks like weakness on the international stage. It looks like handing a win to Iran. Senator Bill Cassidy of Louisiana said it plainly after the vote. You can't be halfway pregnant. We're in there. And by the way, I thought they just made a good case while we are. And so, right now, we've got to support the troops. Senator Bill Cassidy, Louisiana. That is the trap. The action creates the facts. The facts make the opposition politically impossible. And so a war started without authorization becomes a war that cannot be stopped without authorization because the authorization would require Congress to vote against troops already in the field. This is not an accident, it is a pattern. Venezuela in January, Iran in February. What Congress actually did, Senate War Powers vote 47 to 53 failed. One Republican voted yes, one Democrat voted no. House War Powers vote 212, 219 failed. Two Republicans voted yes, four Democrats voted no. Total powers resolution since June 2025, 8 introduced. All 8 have failed. Senator Tim Kaine, who sponsored the resolution, said after the vote that this will not be the last attempt. Democrats are already looking at the appropriations process, controlling the funding, as the next lever. Senator Mark Warner, the top Democrat on the Intelligence Committee, said he saw no intelligence suggesting that Iran was planning a preemptive strike on America. None. Speaker Mike Johnson said the United States was not at war. Hours later, Trump contradicted him publicly, calling it a war. The administration that started the war cannot agree on whether it is a war. And through all of it, the prices kept rising. Gas, groceries, diesel, mortgages. Let me put the specific numbers on the table because this is where the constitutional story and the kitchen table story become the same story. At the gas pump on February 24th, the day of Trump's State of the Union, the national average for a gallon of regular gasoline was $2.92. Trump boasted during that speech about gas prices as low as 185 in Iowa. 4 days later, the war began. National gas average at State of the Union $2.92, February 24, 2026. National gas average as of March 8, $3.41 per gallon, AAA, up 43 cents in 6 days. Diesel price $4.51 per gallon, up 75 cents from last week. Oil price at State of the Union $70.77 per barrel, Brent crude, February 24th. Oil price as of March 9th, above $100 per barrel. First time since Russia invaded Ukraine. 1 week gas price increase, largest since March 2022, Ukraine invasion. All of the progress on gas prices during Trump's first year in office wiped out in 6 days. The AAA confirmed it, Gas Buddy confirmed it, PolitiFact verified it. Every dollar of progress on affordability that the administration had claimed as a victory, gone. And Trump's response when asked about rising gas prices, if they rise, they rise. At the grocery store, the connection between oil prices and grocery prices is not abstract. It runs through diesel, which powers every truck that moves every product from every warehouse to every store in America. When diesel goes up 75 cents a gallon, that cost does not stay with the trucking company. It moves through the supply chain. It takes approximately 6 weeks for crude oil price increases to fully transmit to consumer goods prices. That means the full impact of what happened on February 28th has not yet arrived on grocery shelves. What Americans are feeling right now is only the beginning. Grocery price impact expected to rise. Transportation costs transmit through supply chain within 6 weeks. PBS NewsHour. Goldman Sachs inflation forecasts could snap back to 3% in 2026 if war persists, up from 2.4% in January. IMF estimate every 10% sustained oil rise adds 0.4% to global inflation and cuts 0.15% from growth. The housing market for millions of Americans who have been waiting on the sidelines of the housing market, watching mortgage rates, waiting for the moment they could afford to buy. February 2026 looked like the window was finally opening. Mortgage rates had fallen below 6% for the first time since 2022. That represented months of progress. 3 Federal Reserve rate cuts and genuine relief for first time home buyers. The war closed that window in days. Mortgage rate before war below 6% for the first time since 2022 fell in final week of February. Mortgage rate as of March 6, 6.13% on a 30-year fixed. Mortgage News Daily. Federal Reserve March 18 meeting, 95.5% chance of no rate cut. Federal Watch tool. War complicates inflation picture. Higher oil prices raise inflation fears. Inflation fears raise treasury yields. Treasury yields drive mortgage rates. The housing market, already strained by years of high rates, is frozen again. One decision made without a vote, and the dream of home ownership recedes for millions of Americans who had nothing to do with it. Who gets hit hardest? This is the part that the affordability conversation usually skips over. Higher gas prices are not a flat tax. They fall heaviest on people who can least afford them. It's particularly hard on lower income households that spend higher share of their budget on gas. That's the group that's already under a lot of financial pressure. Mark Zandi, chief economist, Moody's. A family earning 150,000 a year and paying an extra 50 cents a gallon notices it. A family earning 35,000 a year and paying an extra 50 cents a gallon feels it in the food budget, in the utility bills, in the choice between filling up the tank and buying groceries. Every sustained 1 cent increase in the cost of a gallon of gasoline increases national spending on gasoline by nearly 1.4 billion over the course of a year. We are not talking about the 1 cent. We are talking about 43 cents in 6 days, with analysts warning the full price impact has not yet arrived. The people paying that price did not get a vote on February 28th. I want to be precise about what I am and am not arguing here. I'm not arguing that Iran is not a serious national security concern. It is. The nuclear program, the regional proxy network, the decades of hostility, these are real. Reasonable people debate whether military action was ultimately necessary. What I am arguing is something different and more specific. I am arguing that the mechanism by which this decision was made, one person, no vote, no debate, no authorization, is itself a danger to the constitutional order, regardless of whether the underlying decision was right or wrong. Here's why that distinction matters. What the founders were actually afraid of. The founders did not put the war power in Congress because they thought Congress was wise. They put it in Congress because they understood that whoever controls war controls everything. That concentrated military power in a single executive is the definition of tyranny, regardless of whether the person wielding it is competent or incompetent, right or wrong. Alexander Hamilton, who was one of the strongest advocates for executive power among the founders, still wrote in Federalist Number 69 that the president's role as commander in chief was far more limited than the King of England, specifically because the power to declare war stayed with Congress. The design was the president commands the military, Congress decides whether to go to war. Those are two different functions held by two different branches for a specific reason. The Supreme Court has already weighed in on this. In 1952, President Truman wanted to seize American steel during the Korean War to prevent a labor strike from disrupting weapons production. He did it by executive order, no congressional authorization. The Supreme Court ruled against him, and Justice Robert Jackson wrote a concurrence that became the most cited framework for analyzing executive power in American history. He said the president's authority is at its lowest when he acts against the will or without the authorization of Congress. And Congress has the war power. That was 1952. The Constitution has not changed. The Venezuela operation in January and the Iran war in February are both operating in exactly the zone Justice Jackson described as president's lowest constitutional authority. Action without congressional authorization. If these cases reach the Supreme Court, Youngstown is the framework the court will apply. The pattern is not accidental. What makes the current situation constitutionally distinct from previous presidents is not just that congressional authorization was skipped. It is that congressional authorization appears to have been deliberately designed around strike fast enough that Congress cannot act in advance, create facts on the ground that makes opposition politically impossible, notify Congress after the action has already been taken, let the 60-day clock run while the war expands. By the time Congress votes, 8 times, all failed. The troops are already there. The embassies are already under attack. The oil is already above $100. And voting against the war means voting against the troops. This is not constitutional gray area. Senator Kaine called it plainly. This is an illegal war. The Constitution says no declaration of war without Congress. The president has called this war against Iran. Senator Tim Kaine, Senate floor, and the Brookings Institution, not a partisan organization, wrote the rise of executive power at the expense of Congress, which threatens to upend the system of checks and balances, is the central constitutional issue of our time. Brookings Institution. The economic pain you are feeling at the pump, at the grocery store, in the mortgage rate that went back above 6%, that is a direct cause of a constitutional mechanism being exploited. One person made a decision that 330 million people are now paying for, and the system designed to prevent exactly that is being used against itself. I want to be honest with you about something before I tell you what you can do. The war powers resolutions failed. Both chambers, the constitutional mechanism designed to check executive war powers, has been used 8 times since June. It has failed 8 times. I am not going to tell you that calling your representative will immediately stop this war. It will not. What I am going to tell you is what the record shows actually moves elected officials. And what the record shows is this: they count. Every contact is a data point. A representative in competitive district who receives 500 calls against a war reads that as an electoral risk. Elect- Not conscience, electoral risk. That is the honest mechanism. So here's what you can actually do specifically right now. Action 1. Contact your representative. Contact your representative on the appropriations process. The war powers vote failed, but the war requires funding. Congress controls the purse. Senator Kaine said explicitly after the vote that the appropriations process is the next lever Democrats are planning to use. That means the debate is moving to funding, and that is a debate where every member of Congress has to vote. The message is simple: I did not vote for this war. I am paying for it at the pump, at the grocery stores, in my mortgage rate. I want my representative on the record about whether to continue funding it without proper authorization vote. To find a representative, go to house.gov and, and senate.gov, enter your zip code. You will have one House member and two senators. All three offices have phone numbers and contact forms. A phone call is more effective than an email. A constituent in your zip code calling during business hours is the highest value contact a congressional office receives. Action 2. Know the November midterm stakes. Every House seat is up in November 2026. One third of the Senate is up. The economic pain from this war, the gas prices, the grocery prices, the frozen housing market will still be present in November if the war continues. The members who voted against the war powers resolutions will have to answer for that record. This is not partisan guidance. I am not telling you which party to vote for. I am telling you that November is the constitutional accountability mechanism that actually functions. The war powers vote failed 47 to 53, 7 votes. In an election year, with gas above $3.40 and oil above $100, 7 votes is not an impossible number to move. Action 3. Understand what is coming before it gets to the court. The constitutional questions raised by Venezuela and Iran are going to reach the Supreme Court. The Youngstown framework will be applied. The question of whether a president can conduct a major war without congressional authorization, using the speed of the action to make congressional response impossible, is a question the court has not fully answered in the modern context. When that case arrives, the people who have followed the third voice will understand the framework. They will not be dependent on a cable news panel to tell them what the decision means. They will be able to read the opinion, apply the Youngstown tests, and evaluate it themselves. That is why this channel exists. Not to tell you what to think, to give you the tools to think for yourself before the moment arrives when those tools matter most. Action 4. Have this conversation. The most important thing you can do is the simplest. Have this conversation with one person who is not having it. Not to argue, not to convert, to inform. The constitutional mechanism that was bypassed on February 28th was designed to prevent exactly what is happening. One person making a decision that 330 million people pay for. The more people who understand that mechanism clearly, not as partisan argument, but as a constitutional fact, the harder it becomes to keep using it against the people it was designed to protect. Let me assemble what we have established today. On February 28, one person made a decision to go to war with Iran. No congressional vote, no declaration, no defined objective beyond regime change, no answer to how long it will last. In the 6 days that followed, gas prices rose 43 cents per gallon. Oil crossed $100 a barrel for the first time since 2022. Mortgage rates went back above 6% after finally falling below the first time since 2022. Diesel rose 75 cents per gallon. Grocery prices have not yet caught up, but they will within 6 weeks as the transportation costs move through the supply chain. Congress voted to stop it 8 times since June. All 8 failed because the trap built into the system makes opposition politically impossible once the troops are already there. The people paying the highest price for this decision are the people who were already under the most financial pressure. The family filling up a tank that takes $80 instead of $60. The first-time home buyer watching the mortgage rate window close again. The person at the grocery store doing math in the checkout line. None of them voted on February 28. I'm not telling you this war was definitively wrong. Reasonable people can debate that. What I am telling you clearly on the record, with the sources cited, is that the mechanism by which it was started is wrong. It bypasses the constitutional design that was supposed to protect you from exactly this. One person's decision becoming your economic reality. The question is not whether you support this war. The question is whether you believe one person should have that power to make that decision for 330 million people and hand them the bill. The Constitution says no. The founders said no. The Supreme Court said no in 1952. And the record of what has happened to your gas prices, your grocery prices, and your mortgage rate in the last 6 days says the question is not abstract. It is showing up at the pump right now, today. The tools are still there. Contact your representative. Know the midterm stakes. Understand the court case that is coming and have this conversation with one person who is not having it. Clarity is not doom. Clarity is the beginning of accountability. I am Mucho Balinda. This is the third voice. Constitutional analysis in plain English, because the law belongs to all of us, not just the people in the room where decisions get made. This episode helped you see something clearly. Share it, not for the algorithm, because the more people who understand this, the harder it becomes to keep doing it.